A Man Looking for an Opportunity by Mr. Blue. I'm a 25-year-old male. I got home late last night, which in my apartment complex means all the good parking spots are taken. So I parked a good distance from my apartment and began walking towards it. There's a thunderstorm and it's not raining yet, so the air has energy and it smells great. I decide to take my time and make a loop around my building and come up behind it. As I make the corner and begin walking back towards my apartment, I see a guy coming out of the parking lot between two cars. We nod and I slow my pace and he begins walking ahead of me, but I noticed he also slowed down his pace to match mine. So I start going even slower, intending to cut the corner as soon as we approach it and enter my apartment as soon as possible, the front door being right on the corner. He seems reluctant to walk too far ahead of me, so already I'm on alert. He approaches the first corner and I come around. He's at my apartment door shaking my doorknob. He looks right at me as I round the corner and says, "I lost my keys." The realization that he was lying and the implication of the lie slammed every one of my systems into high alert. Everything in me told me not to stop, so I kept on walking and gave him a sympathetic smile. He turns and stares at me and then asks if I have a phone he can borrow. At this point, I'm feeling stuck and I begin to panic. He's pretending that he lives in my apartment, so I can't get in past him. My car is too far away and in the dark, and any sudden movements will alert him that I'm onto him. So I tell him my phone died, which caused my heart to immediately skip a beat because now he thinks I can't call the cops. I walked one door over and started knocking on the door. It's past midnight. The guy is standing at my doorstep just staring at me. After an eternity, my neighbor, who I'm on friendly speaking terms with, opens the door. I immediately say, "Hey, Kevin," and push past him into his apartment. I immediately turn and close the door and locked it. I explained to my neighbor what was happening and he went to get his gun and I called the cops. But the guy was gone now and I'll never be able to walk around my apartment complex without constantly looking over my shoulder. My story takes place on my college campus during the fall of that year. I lived with my grandparents before leaving for school, and I'm extremely close to them. Also, I'm very shy and had zero friends or people I regularly hung out with at school. I wanted to reach out and meet new people, so I signed up for a salsa dancing club that met on Friday nights. I told my grandma over the phone and she was happy I was putting myself out there. She asked if I was going with anybody. "No," I told her. "I think I'm just going to go by myself. No big deal." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Don't any of your roommates want to go?" The idea of talking to my roommates terrified me. I could handle structured gatherings, but personal conversations left more room for my awkwardness to creep in. "No, they're not here." "I don't want you walking around campus by yourself at night." I thought my grandma was just being overprotective. "Grandma, it's fine. The streets are well lit and it's only a 10-minute walk. It's safe." "Well, if you're not going with anybody, call me and let me talk to you on the phone as you walk back." I agreed. That evening was incredibly fun, learning the basic steps and dancing to upbeat Latin tunes. At around 10:30, I felt ready to head back to my dorm, so I snuck out of the building and headed towards my dorm. Although the paved path that I was walking on was lit by streetlights, it seemed darker than usual. In addition, the entire campus was deserted. Normally there were quite a few kids my age wandering around, but that night there was not a soul to be seen. I dialed my grandma and made small talk with her as I walked. I took my heels off and carried them in my free hand. Now, the path I was walking on went past a stretch of sidewalk that was perpendicular to the one I was taking. Under one of the streetlights about 10 meters away, I noticed a lone figure standing with its back towards me. The figure, hearing me chatting on the phone, slowly turned toward me. He was tall and heavyset with wild red hair and appeared to be wearing light blue pajamas. His face was obscured by a killer clown mask. The mask was stark white with dark black eye sockets and a twisted, malicious grin. Time seemed to suddenly slow way down. The clown did not move toward me. He simply stood there staring. I knew I had to think fast. I contemplated my options. I could A, scream like a little girl and run away. B. Approach him and confront him. Or C. Pretend he didn't scare me. The entire moment I just described couldn't have lasted more than a second, but in the moment it felt like an eternity. "Are you there?" I heard my grandma say on the phone. Remembering to breathe with the phone still at my ear, I decided to go with plan C. I broke eye contact with the clown. "So anyway," I said loudly enough that the clown would hear me. "Yeah, I'm on my way," I continued. "Lopsided squid, what's going on? Is everything okay?" I heard my grandma ask, her voice suddenly filled with anxiety. As confidently and nonchalantly as I could, I walked past the sidewalk where this clown was standing, continuing to chat. His head slowly turned as I walked past, watching me until I was out of sight. I ducked into the archway of the nearest building and tried the door, praying it was unlocked. It was. Once I was inside, I slumped against one of the concrete walls and broke down in tears. I explained to my grandma what had just happened. My grandma yelled for my grandpa to dial the campus police on his cell phone so that I could stay on the phone with her. I got up and started pacing up and down the empty halls, checking every door and window to see if the psycho clown had followed me. Was he just a stupid kid doing this on a dare? Or was he someone with more evil intentions? Some of those creepy clowns that were featured in the news had axes or baseball bats. I had no idea if that clown was armed. When my grandpa tried to explain to the officer on the phone what had happened and that I needed help, he told my grandpa, "Your granddaughter needs to make the call herself." Apparently the reason I had to talk to them was so that they could be sure the call wasn't a prank or some stupid reason like that. The point I'm making here is that they wouldn't take my grandparents' word that I was in distress. I would have to hang up with my grandma and then dial the campus police myself. Not knowing if I would survive the night, I told my grandma between sobs, "I love you." "I love you too." My grandma was also crying. I dialed campus police and told them who I was and what had happened. The officer on the phone sent several other officers to find me while I stayed on the phone with him and gave him a description of the clown. As I was talking, I heard a door open. I froze. Was the clown here? Did he find a way in? A tidal wave of relief washed over me as several officers came striding down the corridor. They walked with me back to my dorm. As soon as I was inside, I locked my door and window and I shut the blinds. I called back my grandma to tell her I was safe. After talking for a little while longer, we said goodnight. Since then, I've made a few friends at school. While I'm in a better place now, I don't go out alone after dark anymore. And as for that creepy clown, I never saw him again after that. And I hope I never do. Stalked by a police officer by Ready User 10134. So, as you can tell by the title of this story, I was stalked by a cop. Before I say anything else, I'm going to start from the beginning because this story is crazy. When I was about 14, I had this friend who we'll call Sally. Sally was my best friend at the time, and we would constantly hang out. So when Sally asked me if I wanted to go with her to a church lock-in, I of course said yes. So how a lock-in works is that you go somewhere at night and you're locked in until the morning. When I was at the lock-in, I remember laying on a sleeping bag, and then Sally's family friend approached us and introduced himself. He told me his name was Chad and he was in a police uniform. At the time, I thought he was really cool. We ended up doing a lot at the lock-in, and then came morning and it was over. So after the lock-in, I remember Chad had followed me on all of the social media I had. When I saw this, I will admit that it kinda weirded me out. After every time I would post, he would always comment something on the post, no matter what it was. Fast forward a couple of weeks and it started to get really weird. I ended up going to a ball with my friend Sally and guess who was there? Chad. The whole night I was there, Chad had been constantly hitting on me. At this point, I was so uncomfortable that I was just ready to be home and away from him. Except after the ball ended, my friend's parents were unable to take me home, so guess who took me home? It was, of course, Chad. In this type of situation, I had no idea what to do other than ask my friend to ride with us, because there was no way I was going to ride in his car alone. As we were driving, I ended up getting stuck in the seat by Chad, and he kept trying to put his hand on my thigh, which every time I would brush him away, until finally I was home and was able to get away from him. After this night, I knew something was off about him, so I stopped replying to all of his comments. He then would start messaging me on Facebook and DM me on Instagram. He kept messaging me, asking me why I was not replying and asking me out on dates. Let's keep in mind here that Chad was 32 and I was 14. When he started asking me out, that's when I decided to block him from everything, which I figured would stop everything, but sadly it didn't. Then a couple of days after blocking him, I was in the kitchen and I looked through the window and saw the patrol car in front of my house, which again I thought nothing of until the cop rolls down his window and guess what I see? I see that it's Chad. For weeks I would always see his patrol car driving down the street or sitting in front of my house. He also began to make new Instagram accounts and would message me from them. This went on for weeks until finally I told my parents about it. At the time, I didn't know what to do about it because the police are supposed to protect you, and Chad was doing the complete opposite. After telling my parents, they made me message him on Facebook and tell him that if he didn't stop, they would go to the police. That sentence itself was kind of ironic since he is the police to begin with, but whatever. After messaging him, Chad stopped and I didn't hear from him ever again. It wasn't until years later that I heard his name again because I saw in the news that Chad was arrested for molesting a 15-year-old girl. So wherever the hell you are, Chad, which I hope is in prison, I hope to never see you ever again. Creepy Man on Halloween by Reddit user Joshua10. I'm 13 years old, so this happened about 5 years ago when I was 8. It was Halloween, and every year we would go to my grandparents' house. My uncle, who was 14, was taking me and some of my cousins trick-or-treating. It was dark, but there were some people outside waiting on the fireworks show. We trick-or-treated here every year, so we knew the neighborhood like the back of our hands. Everything was going normal, but I was older this year and we wanted more candy, so we decided to go to another neighborhood we never went to before. We went to the first couple of houses and we were all joking around. My uncle was chasing us and I fell. My knee started bleeding. I thought that there was a lot of blood, but I was 8, so I was probably being overdramatic, so I wanted to go back to my grandparents' house to get a Band-Aid. My uncle was going to take everyone back with me, but I told him it wasn't that far. I can just go by myself, and I was the oldest cousin there, so I didn't want to be treated like a baby. When I turned around the corner of the street, there was a man walking alone coming towards me. He looked pretty normal, so I wasn't really scared by him. He stopped in front of me when he got close enough, so I stopped too. He asked me what I was doing out alone, and he seemed pretty friendly. I told him I was going back to my grandma's because I cut my knee when I was trick-or-treating. He said that his house was right down the street and he could get me fixed up in a couple of minutes and I could go back to trick-or-treating. I thought this was a good idea because my mom and dad might not let me out again if they knew we were messing around and I got hurt. So I was a stupid and naive kid and decided to go with him. When we got back to his house, he got me a drink and a Band-Aid and I was sitting on the couch. He came and sat really close to me and I started to get scared because he was acting weird now and not really talking much. He then put his hand on my leg and started moving it around. I just jumped up and went to run out, but he grabbed my arm and pulled me back hard. I started crying and telling him to let me go, but he just started acting friendly again and asked me why I wanted to leave so fast. I didn't know what to do and sort of just froze now and just stayed there because there was nothing else I could really do. Time had passed and I guess I was there longer than I thought because I heard my uncle shouting my name from the street. So he must have gone back to my grandparents' house and realized I wasn't there. The windows were open, so it was pretty loud. I jumped up again and the man saw my reaction and realized it was someone looking for me. I ran out the door this time and he just let me go. I told my uncle and we both ran back to my grandparents and my dad called the police. I was really young then, so my parents didn't tell me this until later, but the guy was actually known by the police as a sex offender. Thank God I got away when I did. I was driven home by my boyfriend's house dozens of times by Thomas Edward Luther, a rapist and serial killer when I was 15, by Danica Darkhand. Back in the mid-90s, while I was living in Colorado, I was dating the son of Deborah Snyder. Deb was the girlfriend of murderer Thomas Luther. This man raped, beat, and murdered several women in West Virginia and Colorado. He assaulted most violently one of the victims with the business end of a hammer. He was always very nice and never gave me the creeps. I wonder if because I was dating his girlfriend's son, that is why nothing bad happened to me. I guess I'll never know. Anyway, once it came out and about who he was and what he had done, I was in complete shock. My mother almost had a heart attack thinking that her baby girl was that close to a monster. My boyfriend never had a close relationship with his mom, and this drove them even further apart. Deb was always defending Tom, and while admitting he did bad things, she still loved him. It still gives me chills to this day thinking about it. Funny thing, over 20 years later, my brother is now a correctional officer at the maximum security prison that Tom is housed at. What a creepy small world. The Online Stalker I Never Met, by Reddit user But Is It Art. This is something that happened to me just a couple months ago. I love Facebook, I love memes, I love talking to new people, I love long comment sections, etc. That being said, I never give away personal information such as where I work or live. My birthday info is private, so on and so on. I've made quite a few friends that I don't know personally, but agree with or had really good discussions with. So after commenting back and forth on a friend's post for a while, it was no surprise to me when Tyler messaged me. It started off fairly simple. We just talked about the post we commented on, how you do's, common interests, etc. I was excited to have a new friend. He seemed pretty interesting and we had a lot in common. I'm not a beauty queen or anything like that, but I let him know after about an hour of casual conversation that I was happily taken. I enjoyed his friendship, but it wouldn't lead to anything more since I'm going to get married next year. He seemed a little upset but respectful. Great. I told him good night, went to sleep, and thought nothing more of it. The conversation continued for a few days. He started to get a little pushy if I didn't respond immediately, and I told him I'm very busy, so I may not always be able to answer right away. He apologized and told me he's just bored and lonely. I started to put a little distance because he didn't really back down, but I didn't want to completely give up on my new friendship because I really hated the fact that he was so lonely. One day he randomly messaged me saying he wanted to have me in his arms. I immediately nipped that in the bud, reminding him of my relationship and telling him if he didn't stop, then our friendship would be done. I'm very loyal and respectful to my fiancé. He immediately lost his shit, messaged me saying he didn't care about my fiancé, making threat towards him, etc. I stopped messaging him and selected to put his messages on ignore. He could still message me, but it wouldn't go to my inbox. I made a post about it and a friend of mine commented and said he had done the same thing to her, except he knew where she lived and would show up outside of her house. I totally freaked out and went to see if there were more messages from him because she told me he was bad news and I should call the police if any threats were being made. This is where the shitstorm really begins. He messaged me over a dozen times. Different things. Started off kind of taunting me for not answering him. Then moved on to him messaging me about some asshole who cut him off or was driving too slow. Then to him saying he was going to shoot the guy and it would be my fault because I made him so angry by ignoring him. I messaged him telling him to leave me the hell alone and stop replying for a while. He started messaging me narrowing down on where I live. Now that's really freaked me out, as I had never told him where I lived or anything even remotely close to my house. The only thing I ever said was I'd talk to him later because I was going to Arby's to get some food and my phone was dying. Yet he somehow knew I was 7 minutes from the Arby's by my house. Exactly how long it takes to walk there for me. And there are several Arby's in my city. Then he started narrowing down to which street I lived off of. Down to knowing a 4-door black sedan was linked to my address. Which there was, but not in my name. It was in my sister's name when she registered it as an Uber. That was enough for me, and I called the non-emergency line. The police refused to do anything, saying until he actually showed up or did something, there was really nothing that could be done. Never mind that he was sending me pictures of dead people and saying that was going to be me and my family and narrowing down my address. Unless he actually showed up, I was screwed. All I could do was apply for a protective order, so I did. Tyler kept messaging me, so I told him there was a PO in place and he needed to leave me alone. He responded with there was nothing that could be done until he was served and signed it, which unfortunately is true. My fiance is in IT and has a cousin who is pretty tech savvy as well and managed to get the last couple of addresses Tyler had, but the police couldn't find him at either of those. We had license plate numbers, his address, full name, birthday, etc. Yet he seemed untraceable. He stopped for a while, but the day of my court case to have the PO extended to 2 years, he started again. My fiance filed criminal charges for the threats he made. He said, "Someone could come shoot you in 15 minutes." His last known address was exactly a 15-minute drive from my house. I was terrified to say the least. I've spent the last couple of months completely afraid. He was arrested and served finally, and as it turns out, he has a history of this. Multiple charges all dropped or dismissed. He's done it to a couple of my friends who showed up to my court case for the criminal charges. They dropped everything from felonies to a misdemeanor disorderly conduct charge with 12 months suspended jail time, depending on his behavior because they couldn't prove it was him and not someone else behind the keyboard. Especially with me never seeing his face in real life before this court date, even though I had 2 people who had received messages from him and seen him face to face as well. I can't sleep. The slightest noise wakes me up in a panic. It's been a nightmare living hell for me and my family, but I think I'm gonna be okay. My Father's Employee by Reddit user Verona Dactyl. So, my dad runs a tree removal business out of our backyard and has been since I was a baby. When I was 5, we moved to a house with almost 5 acres of property, so he could park his work trucks, use wood chippers, and split firewood comfortably. As a child, my brother and I loved playing near that. So, my house is a little ways down a long driveway, and the driveway continues a bit, and then there's a garage with a little apartment attached. At this time, a couple my parents were friends with rented this apartment, and this was about 50 yards away from the house. Fast forward to when I was 10 years old and my brother was 13 at the time. Also, something to note is my dad's employees aren't exactly admirable people. Ex-addicts, thieves, and I don't even know truthfully, but workers came and went. It's obviously not the best job. To work in the hot summer months and then have no work during the winter. Anyway, my dad hired these 2 brothers who were in their early 20s. One of them I remember was very good looking and his brother seemed dorky to me and wore glasses. 10-year-old me didn't pay much attention obviously. All I wanted to do was climb the wood piles in my backyard. One fall day after school, I remember my mom saying it was too chilly to play outside and to stay inside. I remember this so vividly. I literally remember what I was wearing and how I wanted my favorite stuffed animal near me as I colored. So I'm coloring. It's probably around 4:30 and my dad and his workers have just gotten back and are in the garage, maybe smoking weed and having a beer together. Apparently that was a normal routine after a long day. My mom was reading or something right beside me. My brother was a few houses down the street with his friend and his family whom we've grown close with. All of a sudden, my dad comes running through the back door and he's yelling, "Get out of the house! Grab her and get out now! Run to the neighbor's house right now!" He's yelling all of this to my mom. Scared and confused, my mom jumps up, as do I, and I'm grateful my stuffed animal is close by, so I grab that and we run out of the front door to the neighbors. It was chilly and my mom and I are barefoot. We fly up our long driveway and my dad, who I thought was behind us, stalls at the end of our driveway on the phone yelling to someone. We get to the neighbors where my brother is and we all see the cops speed by our house. We're all so confused. As it turned out, those brothers that my dad had hired were hiding something. The dorky one with the glasses was very mentally ill and was apparently off his meds. Him, his brother, and his family were too embarrassed to mention that, and apparently smoking weed and drinking alcohol was a trigger. That evening, when the employees smoked weed and had a beer after that job, they failed to notice that the guy went to his car to grab a rifle and started shooting all over the place, especially at the wood piles, which I would have been playing on normally, and into the garage with my dad's employees. He also shot at the cars and left bullet holes in many of the workers and the tenants' cars. The workers ran into the attached apartment to the garage with that couple living there. During this, my dad ran as fast as he could to the house to save my mom and me. So my dad's badass friend who lived in the apartment grabbed his hunter rifle and ran down to the garage area while the employees hid in the shower. He saw the shooter jump in his car with his gun and was about to speed off. My dad's friend took his own rifle, broke the shooter's car window, and grabbed the gun out of his hands, but the shooter took off down our long driveway. I gotta say, I'm glad my mom and I weren't running on the driveway when he was speeding out at full speed. The cops caught him very quickly just down the street, opposite end of the street where we hid. He was arrested and my parents didn't press charges since no one was hurt. They were more upset that this all could have been avoided had someone just mentioned he was mentally ill. My dad doesn't run background checks, just will pay whoever is willing and needed cash. Shady, I'm well aware. Also, something I literally just learned tonight. The day prior to the shooting, my brother had a weird encounter with the shooter. He was at a gas station with our neighbor, a friend of his, in the same family's house we hid at the next day. My dad's worker pulls up and offers them a ride home, literally a 3-minute car ride, and they agree because they know and recognize him. They note that he's strangely wearing black nail polish and his hood up, which wasn't normal of him, but they thought nothing of it. We think now that maybe it had to do with him being off his meds, or maybe it was a coincidence. Who really knows? I'm 25 now and I remember the experience vividly. I hope I never hear my dad's voice with that tone ever again. It was so scary. I still do not know how I didn't hear the gunshots though. My mom believed because we live very close to a gun range we have grown accustomed to that sound nearby. But who really knows? The Time My Paranoia Possibly Saved My Life by J. Ward 027. So today I was staying in a hotel about 275 miles from home. I've been in the city for a couple of days, but we just switched hotels last night due to the fact that the other one was mold infested and gross. Anyways, we're here to drop my brother off at college and tonight was his last night with us before he left. We decided to have a silly string fight in the hotel parking lot, run around the outside of the hotel, just fun, stupid teenager things. Somebody was standing on the top of the stairs that led to the second floor of the motel, watching and staring at us. No big deal though, we were being pretty loud and obnoxious. My brother and my mom left to bring my brother back to his dorm room. I decided to stay behind at the hotel room as all I had been doing for the past 3 days was riding in a car and I needed a break. So I was on the phone with my friend Adrian. So I was just talking to Adrian when all of a sudden someone knocks on the door the same exact way my mom does. We have one of those secret knocks. I was about to swing open the door per usual as I was 99% certain it was my mother. But for some reason something just told me to look out the peephole. The person standing outside of my hotel room door was the same exact person watching us earlier on top of the stairs. I'm very paranoid, so obviously I didn't answer the door. I start freaking out and talking to Adrian quietly and the person yells, "Open this fucking door," and starts banging harder on the door. I sit there talking quietly to Adrian for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then slowly walk back up to the door and go look through the peephole, when this person slams their body weight against the door and starts viciously shaking the handle. At this point, I text my brother on Snapchat at least 30 times to come back to the hotel. He says they're about 10 minutes away and just to sit tight and that he's coming back. He does, and by the time they get back, the person is gone. Definitely not the worst of experiences, but I'm still pretty shaken up by this. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all enjoyed today's video.